A sampler is a piece of embroidery produced as a demonstration, a test of skill in needlework. It often includes the alphabet, figures, motifs, decorative borders, and sometimes the name of the person who embroidered it and the date. The word sampler is derived from the Latin exemplum, an example. History. The earliest sampler extant is a spot sampler, i.e., one having randomly scattered motifs of the Nazca culture in Peru, formerly in the Museum of Primitive Art, New York City. It is estimated to date from California, 200 BCE to 300 CE, and is worked in cotton and wool pattern darning on a woven cotton ground. It has 74 figures of birds, plants, and mythological beings. Coptic sampler fragments of silk on linen and double running stitch and pattern darning have been found in Egyptian burial grounds of 400–500 CE. These are pattern samplers having designs based on early Christian symbols. Samplers were known to be used by stitchers in Europe as early as the beginning of the 16th century, although none that early have been found. A collection of 50 decados was listed in the 1509 inventory of the possessions of Queen Joanna of Castile. They were described as stitchery and dechalado, some in silk and others in gold thread. At the time of the inventory they were in the care of her chamberlain Diego de Rivera and his son Alonso, but they have all disappeared. The oldest surviving European samplers were made in the 16th and 17th centuries. As there were few pre-printed patterns available for needleworkers, a stitched model was needed. Whenever a needlewoman saw a new and interesting example of a stitching pattern, she would quickly sew a small sample of it onto a piece of cloth, her sampler. The patterns were sewn randomly onto the fabric as a reference for future use, and the woman would collect extra stitches and patterns throughout her lifetime. The first printed pattern book for Mode Model Buchlein was published by Johann Schanzberger the Younger of Augsburg in 1523, but it was not easily obtainable, and a sampler was the most common form of reference available to many women. Pattern books were widely copied and issued by other publishers. Some are still available in reprint today. The earliest British dated surviving sampler, housed in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, was made by Jane Bostock, who included her name and the date 1598 in the inscription. Stitched with silk and metal thread on linen, it has pictorial figures above with border and all over patterns below. The inscription reads, INE, Bostock 1598. Alice Lee was born the 23 of November, being TWESDAY, in the after no 1, 1596. The museum has two other samplers believed to date from the 16th century, one from Germany with religious motifs and one from Italy with floral patterns and grotesques. Both are worked in silk and linen. A Dutch sampler dated 1585 survives in the Netherlands Openlucht Museum in Arnhem. A sampler in the Museum of London has two cutwork bands stitched in silk, gold, and silver threads, and 13 bands of reticella whitework in white linen thread. The fourth band from the top has the initials ER, the royal arms of Queen Elizabeth I, and the maker's name Susan Edgabi in bold letters. It is believed to date before the Queen's death in 1603. Because very few samplers from the 16th century have been found, it is not possible to generalize about the style and appearance. By the middle of the 17th century, English, Dutch, and German samplers were being stitched on a narrow band of fabric 6 to 9 in wide. As fabric was very expensive, these samplers were totally covered with neat rows of stitches. They were known as band samplers and valued highly, are often being mentioned in wills and passed down through the generations. These samplers were stitched using a variety of needlework styles, threads, and ornament. Many of them were exceedingly elaborate, incorporating subtly shaded colors, silk and metallic embroidery threads. A using stitches such as Hungarian, Florentine, tent, crossed long-armed, crossed two-sided, Italian crossed, rice, running, Holbein, Algerian iron buttonhole stitches. The samplers also incorporated small designs of flowers and animals, and geometric design stitched using as many as 20 different colors of thread. Some were stitched partially or entirely in whitework. Band samplers were more decorative than the utilitarian random motif spot samplers, and stitchers finished them by adding the names, dates of completion, and sometimes teacher or school names. As the work of sampler making moved into schools in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, design styles changed. Alphabets and verses were added along with pictorial elements such as architectural motifs, landscapes, and large potted plants. Educational themes included maps, multiplication tables, perpetual calendars, and acrostic puzzles. By the 18th century, samplers were a complete contrast to the scattered samples sown earlier on. They became wider and more square, eventually with borders on all four sides. Samplers were mainly school exercises during the 18th and 19th centuries, and were almost entirely worked in cross-stitch. Design styles were increasingly influenced by Berlin woolwork, which became popular worldwide. These samplers were stitched more to demonstrate knowledge than to preserve skill. The stitching of samplers was believed to be a sign of virtue, achievement and industry, and girls were taught the art from a young age. Berlin woolwork designs had naturalistic shading and more depth of perspective than the flat two-dimensional objects on traditional needlework. By mid-19th century, adult needleworkers were devising long and narrow stitch samplers having geometric patterns done in woolwork. The art needlework movement and elimination of samplers from female education brought about the decline in traditional sampler making that continued into the 20th century. Modern samplers. Samplers are widely stitched today, some using kits purchased from needlework shops, some from chart packs, and many from patterns available on the internet or through email from designers. Patterns range from simple using only one stitch, to complex, using 15 to 20 and more stitches. Designs range widely in style, from accurate reproductions of historic pieces to much more contemporary and modern styles. Popular topics include designs commemorating births and marriages, family trees, and mottos of all kinds. Map charts are widely available in English-speaking countries and Denmark. These are often pictorial maps of local areas, whole countries, or even the imaginary realms of Tolkien's Middle-earth. Many sampler reproductions are also available, copying colors and imperfect stitches from the originals. The word sampler is sometimes inaccurately applied to any piece of needlework meant for display. However, the genre may broadly be said to include any needlework in sampler style with or without lettering. Materials used include cloth, even weave, and linen fabrics, in cotton, linen, and man-made materials combined in more and more ways, and fibers from cotton floss to silk, rayon, viscose, and metallic.